It's the quarterly report, the quarterly Panther report with Kyle Bailey, and then we also have now in studio one of the regulars, friend of the show, Cam Wolfe, and this is a Panthers breakdown. Unfortunately, yesterday, the Carolina Panthers relieved Frank Reich of his duties. So let's go ahead and backtrack. How did we get here? Who wants to start first?
I'll
jump in here. Yeah, I'll jump in here. The reality is the Panthers have not been a very good football team, and it's been rough, particularly on offense. Mm-hmm. And the writing was on the wall for the last few weeks. This is a 1-10 team. They thought they were going to be better. Bryce Young has not performed to the level they thought he was going to, and this offense has really lacked imagination. And so you could really tell over the last few weeks, especially after Frank Reich gave Thomas Brown play calling duties and then took them back 3 weeks later. There was growing tension inside the building. There was growing pressure on Frank Reich to get something right. And over the last 2 weeks since he's resumed the play calling duties, the offense has not changed one bit. And so I think there was a consensus with David Tepper and people in the building that they were going to get rid of Frank Reich at the end of the season regardless. And so he decided to make that move now and say, hey, let's go ahead and cut our ties and start our search early.
So let's dissect a little bit of that because obviously Cam, you scour the globe at a lot of different teams, and so you have a lot of different information. But obviously, me and Kyle, we sit here in Charlotte primarily, and so we hear, we see. But at the end of the day, no matter what you hear and see, it's always based on the outcome of the game, the product on the field.
Yeah,
right.
And so you get Frank right here, an offensive-minded coach, because you need to get your franchise quarterback. Now they get their franchise quarterback, and there's this expectation that prior to the season they would be better than 1-11.
Yeah.
Now they're not better than 1-11. As we go through, take us through what your perspective here locally.
Yeah.
Because you also have had conversations with people in the building, because that's your job. Your job is to get a lay of the land.
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
You get a sneak peek into how things are done.
Yeah. Well, I think, everything Cam just said is accurate. And I think, I talk to a lot of people around the team, and you talk to a lot of people around it. A lot of things get said is the point. But at the end of the day, do you win or do you lose?
Yeah.
And oftentimes it matters how you lose and, what your demeanor is after you lose and how those conversations with the owner go. And I think it was clear on the sidelines sometimes, to me anyway, the past couple of weeks, to what Cam said, that you saw Frank Reich that I think he knew what was going on. There were reports that, he told his staff that he was in trouble. I go back to some of the conversations that I think you and I had at one point about how, some of the guys who study film for a living had been really critical of what Frank had been doing offensively.
Yeah.
And when you're brought here, and not just brought here to be the offensive head coach, the offensive-minded head coach, the first in Panthers history, by the way, but you're gifted a number one overall quarterback who they traded up to go get, the expectation is that he develops, that he gets something, you get something out of him. And that really hasn't happened. Now, I will say it looked like Bryce was making really steady progress up through Miami. And, of course, the Houston game, and they only scored 15 points. But, then after that, it started to feel like there was a little bit of regression, like the offense had gotten really stale. And to Cam's point, there was some real dissatisfaction in the building with what was going on. And that was clearly communicated. And I think the pressure ratcheted up. We saw Frank take back the play calling duties. I think at that point the writing was on the wall. And I think Tennessee was the final straw.
So both of you guys talk about this, because sometimes we hear, like, the fans assume, oh, he's taking back play calling, right? And we can assume a lot of things. But ultimately we don't, we can hear, and then there's what someone says, and in the middle lies the truth.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So where do you guys believe lies the truth in the weeks leading up to ultimately him being let go literally after Thanksgiving?
So I'll jump in there, and I think you said a great point. Like I actually reported 3 weeks ago what you had mentioned, that Frank Reich had been telling his assistants that I'm worried about getting fired. He's having weekly conversations with David Tepper, who's obviously putting some sense of urgency on him, and I believe, based on what I'm hearing, that had a direct impact on his decision to take the play calling back from Thomas Brown. From what I understand, he essentially is telling the staff, telling Thomas that if I'm going to go out, I'm going to go out on my own shield. I'm going to go out with what I do, which is calling plays. And it really had little to do with Thomas Brown, because it's always been Frank Reich's offense. And, you said it great. When you look at what Frank Reich's offense is, it's an offense that is static, is stagnant. If you look at the numbers, they're in the bottom 5 in pre-snap motion, bottom 5 in play action. They're essentially a team that lines up in shotgun or pistol, 3 receiver sets, and just does what they do. And they really struggled to adjust to their personnel. Mm-hmm. And I talked to a lot of defensive coordinators who faced them, and they said they're predictable. We know what they're going to do, and they don't adjust. And so when you have a young quarterback, the last thing you want him to have is a predictable offense, because teams can just tee off on you. And so I think you saw the Panthers struggling with that. Obviously, the players deserve a lot of the blame. They didn't play well enough, but your coaches have to help. Your coaches have to help. Yeah.
But so here's where I would push back, because being a former player, and I always dislike, right, when things like this happen with a new regime, you're going to get a different perspective and value of each individual player.
Okay.
Now, my problem is that a lot of times, sometimes we blame players, and then after the players are gone, then we come to the conclusion that it's the coach, right? Maybe not necessarily the player, but it may be the coach. Now, in this one, we would say it's been evident it's the coach, right? The offensive-minded coach. And let me preface it by saying this. If you major, if your degree, if your license, your master's program, everything that lines up says that you're an offense or defensive coordinator, and what is the worst on the team is your certification, that is a receipt.
Well, and
a recipe.
And I would say this too, to that point.
Fire.
Yes. To underscore that point, I would say this too. It's why especially with this team in particular, I'm willing to give grace to injuries. We always should be when the team suffers a lot of them. But then you look on the defensive side of the football, and Ejiro Evero showing up every week and saying, "Who do I got? All right, y'all get over here." And he's got a game plan. And these dudes, they're salty every single week, and they're giving them a chance to win. So they keep
in the game for 3 quarters
with that 100%.
Right, and then the damn breaks offensively.
Right.
And then there's so much pressure on the defense.
Every single week.
Yeah.
And to Cam's point a second ago, he's absolutely right. One of the things that, I hear a lot from fans, from the people that I have on the show, and just from others that break down film, is exactly his point. I'm watching a play 3rd down and 6 Sunday against the Titans. And look, this happens. You give credit to defenses in the NFL because those guys get paid too. But there was a play on 3rd down where it looked like the Titans defense knew exactly what they were running. Every pass catcher in a route was in handcuffs. Nobody was open. And, again, that's not entirely abnormal, but when it looks like the defense is routinely calling out and knowing exactly what you're running offensively, that's a real problem.
It is.
Absolutely. And one thing that, we kind of heard a lot before the season, because let's put context on this. They thought they were bringing in this all-star coaching regime to help Bryce Young, and they were going to be able to have success early.
So they did bring in former players, and I give Frank credit. I like the former players because as a former player, as a former player, as a coach with a current player, there are times, even though he's your coach, there are times that former player will go, I'm getting a little bit too coachy, huh? Right? I got you. Right? So that is always good.
And Steve, to your point, I like the moves. I praised them. I was on TV on NFL Network talking about how great this staff is. When you go down from your Jim Caldwell's, your Thomas Browns, your Josh McCowns, you got Deuce Staley in the building. You got D'Angelo Hall on the other side. There's a lot of former players on the roster. But when it came down to it, I question how much Frank let them have a say in what the core of the offense was. I think we were sold early in the season that this was going to be a merging of what Thomas Brown did with the Rams.
Yes.
You'll get some insight into what Josh McCown, who played quarterback, did. And ultimately, when things started to struggle, from what I understand, Frank started to push his scheme more and more as the core of the offense. And then you also have what Bryce does. And Bryce is a young quarterback who has a lot of potential, a lot of upside. I think that he's going to be a really good player in the league. But he has some elements that he wants to do, and it's not college anymore. And I think that sometimes they needed somebody to push back and tell Bryce, hey, this is the way we're going to do it. This is how we adjust to things. And I just think there was a lack of that maybe hard coaching that needed to be getting guys to where they need to go.
He makes a really good point there, and I was thinking about this morning. When he hired Matt Rule brought a lot of his own dudes with him. He brought a lot of his own buddies with him, right? They all do, right?
Sorry.
But when they hire Frank Reich, they kind of went a different direction, right? Because he and Thomas Brown had never met before.
Right.
He had never coached with Jim Caldwell before. So what David Tepper did deliberately this time was you have basically carte blanche to use my money to go hire as many of the best coaches as you possibly can. Let's build us an all-star staff. I don't want you just going out and hiring your buddies. So they still didn't do it the conventional way, in a sense. And yesterday I kind of thought of that as the news came down that Chris Tabor and Jim Caldwell had decided to let Deuce Staley and Josh McCown go. And, all of a sudden these rumors start floating about, like, why did they do that? Were these the guys that wanted C.J. Stroud? And so I was like, maybe they're just clearing elbow room. Maybe there's just too many chefs in this kitchen, and you got Jim Caldwell, who's been around, Chris Tabor, who's been around, saying, listen, it's not personal, but there's just way too many dudes in this room trying to impose their beliefs and philosophies. We've got to find a clear-cut vision to play these next 6 games. Maybe it wasn't anything as nefarious as what people are making it out to be. Maybe there were just too many big personalities in that room at the end of the day.
Kyle, I think you're right on the money. I'll just say it as that.
Well, there's some things going on in the middle of the season that probably should have been worked out in the offseason, right? And before you said this isn't Frank is terrible, Bryce is terrible, this guy's terrible, that guy's terrible. It's just kind of there's a lot of different stories coming out that we're not necessarily sure that they're all 100% accurate, but it is a perspective or a peek into things that were going on inside the building that, I talked about on your show. You never really know why. Like, you see the product on the field, the wins and losses, but you really don't see what happens Monday through Saturday every single day. And give us a peek into what you've heard about some of the hiccups that slowed the process of the Carolina Panthers winning football games on Sunday.
Yeah, see,
offensively.
When you have a young quarterback, he's always going to have preferences, right? But your job as a coach is to get the most out of him and maybe drive him to what he needs to be. And one thing I heard early on in the season was Bryce Young does not like to call plays off his wristband. For people who don't know, most quarterbacks have a wristband where the play caller can be in their helmet and say wristband play 38, right? And they look down on the play and they call in the play. And the other route is the play caller calls the play directly in their helmet, 36 yellow, Y, 47, whatever the long play is, and he calls it in. Bryce's preference is to hear the play and call it in. And they butted heads a little bit, some of the play callers and Bryce, because they wanted him to speed up the process pre-snap.
Yeah.
Remember, the Panthers had a lot of pre-snap penalties, delay of games, getting out of the huddle slow. And a part of that, from what I understand, was Bryce's, desire to call plays the traditional way rather than the wristband. And also Frank Reich is getting the plays a little slow as well. And so you're seeing those struggles. And to me, on the outside, my thought is, just tell your quarterback, call plays off the wristband. But it took several weeks before we got to that step. And to me, that's something that in the offseason, you work that out. Another element that was a part of that was, you're a team that runs a lot of shotgun and pistol. That, from what I understand, is a large part of what Frank Reich and Bryce Young prefer. When you struggle your offense, to me, that's something you switch up. You go to a little bit more of a under center setup, or you go into a little bit more of a motion setup. And to me, they really are focused on making sure Bryce Young was doing exactly what he wanted, and Frank Reich was doing exactly what he wanted, regardless of what the result was for the offense. And so those two elements for me were examples of why didn't we figure this out in OTAs? Why didn't we figure this out in training camp? And why is it still in season where we're trying to have maybe basic elements of communication figured out?
Well, to me, that isn't a huge deal, right? Because I look at the picture behind you, Cam, and you have a picture of Jalen Ramsey, but then in the middle right there, down at the bottom you got Tua, and then in the middle you have Trevor Lawrence. Well, that just made me think, well, the Jaguars have Tank Bigsby, Travis Etienne, and Ernest Johnston, right? Okay? And they can't run the football to save their life. They don't run the football because the offensive coordinator believes in using the legs of Trevor Lawrence and also using the pass as a way to move the football down the field. So preference and offense and morphing and changing has always been one of the things that quarterbacks, coordinators, head coaches, and even receivers, they're always seeing things uniquely made through rose-colored glasses.
No doubt. Right. Well, and I would say this too. I mean, this is one of the things that you both pointed out that I think is troubling. And Josh Norris gets credit for pulling out the actual numbers on this. But, you know, a coach, an offensive coach like Frank, a former quarterback who's been around this long, you get a rookie quarterback and you're running the least amount of pre-snap motion and shift in the NFL. Absolutely. I mean, that's one of those ways to help a rookie quarterback to reveal what a defense is doing. And to me, that's one of those things that it's like.
So hold that. Okay. Go ahead, Cam.
Can I jump in there real quick?
That's why I said go ahead. Go ahead.
And so one interesting thing about motion, because you're absolutely right. Like I'm here in Miami. The Dolphins, along with the 49ers, run more motion than any other team.
Yeah.
And we see how successful it is, right? And it's helped Tua immensely with what they've done in Miami. The problem with running pre-snap motion is you have to be in control of timing. You have to be able to have the time pre-snap to be able to run that motion.
And they're not getting the line.
One constant I heard is maybe a lack of urgency. Like let's just keep it 100. Bryce Young is cool, collected. He's this California cool guy, but he doesn't have a sense of urgency, and that's something they were trying to put on him. It's hard to run motion. Doesn't mean they can't try it, but it's hard to run motion when you're getting out of the huddle with 10 seconds left. You know, and so I think that compilation of what I was mentioning with the issues with the pre-snap communication probably limited them from even trying it. Frank didn't want to do it in his offense either way, but it limits you from trying to try it when that becomes a core philosophy of your offense that you're getting out of the huddle with 10 to 12 seconds left.
And so that leads me to that's not Frank's offense. That he's never really been that type of offense, right? Where a lot of movement. And then you add Thomas Brown, their combination of Sean McVay, they have a lot of movement. However, everything is in breaking. So you have in breaking, which Bryce is more comfortable throwing.
Right.
And then you have the style of offense that Frank Reich has, which is traditional. Right? In breaking levels. So you have a basic. So a basic is an under. Basic by the tight end. Chip, check to the flat, backside post to clear out the safety. Well, that works if you have the players in place. But you have an offensive line who is more primarily a run block type of offense. Not great, not consistent at blocking in the pass game. And then you can get pressure with 3, at times max 4. You really want to cause an earthquake, give me 5 or 6. But most of the time, pressure with 4 and 3 drops 7 or 8. And now you take away all of that old school with better athletes. And you have lack of separation. And then you put in, right, this new age of football, which is offensive coordinators. My philosophy can get anybody open. And you can, but what happens around this time of the year, the Buffalo Bills, Philadelphia Eagles, Kansas City, the 49ers, and the Cowboys, those main teams that I'm referring to, they have an offense that has levels, but then they also have playmakers, right? Yep. Kind of like who run all emotions, does all that stuff. Now, you mix all of that up, and you have an inconsistent offensive line. You have a rookie quarterback, and then you have a team who are struggling to identify what kind of offense the Carolina Panthers are.
And I think we saw a glimpse of it back in weeks 1 and 2. You and I talked about it, right? Week 1, no DJ Chark. So the guy that you brought in to be your deep threat didn't even play. He gets back in week 2, but it was so clear, especially on those Jesse Bates picks where, he's not even moving his feet at the snap. He's waiting for his opportunity to break and come downhill. Yep. And it's like they're shrinking it to a 25-yard field on a rookie quarterback who's already having to acclimate to greater speed, greater talent, and everything else.
And pressure at the exact same time.
Absolutely. And so all of a sudden, a guy who's already taking a step up in speed, competition, talent, it's like, oh, my God, this feels like probably a completely different game to Bryce Young, really.
Well, it is. It is. He's 1-11.
Yeah, he's never lost like this.
Yeah, but one guy that as you were talking about these other offenses, I mean, look at Bobby Slowick in Houston and what he's doing. I read a quote from Robert Woods weeks ago where he was like, this guy's kind of like revived my career or rejuvenated my career. He's like, I'm ready. I was ready to retire.
Yes.
But he was like, these offensive principles, he's like, we're challenging every inch on the field. He was like the way, and I would encourage anybody to read the way that Robert Woods has talked about, the Slowick offense. It's a branch off the Shanahan tree, but I mean, they're doing things down there to really benefit their rookie quarterback. And we're seeing, unfortunately, a lot of the opposite types of things happen here in Carolina the last several weeks.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely on the money there. They simplified the offense for Bryce as time go on, and that means contracting.
And they need to simplify the offense for a rookie, right?
Absolutely.
That's always been the case. So Bryce simplifying things, and here's what I'll say, because people have said I've made mistakes. Right. Steve just doesn't want to admit they made a mistake, right? I said Bryce's processing is light years on the test versus CJ. Mm-hmm. You can test well and not play well. You cannot test well and still play well.
Yeah.
This test is not a measuring stick of, obviously, the way CJ's playing, of what you can be. But it does say, if you don't have the right combination, the right ingredients in the player and also the system,
yes,
it doesn't matter who's back there.
Right. And sometimes you need the right coach. Like, I love what you said, Kyle, about Bobby Slowick. And I'm going to compare it again here because I live in Miami and I see it, because I see a lot of Tua's early career struggles in what Bryce is struggling with this season. Both guys are really good at processing from college, right? But the thing that translates from college is at Alabama, you're having receivers who are 2, 3, 4 yards open, and that's considered open to you. Whereas here, as you mentioned, Steve, the lack of separation in Carolina, those tight windows are going to come, and you're going to have to make that decision quicker, throw into spots, having the timing right. And your coach has to do a good job of teaching you those principles, maybe relearning how you define open. And I don't know if they've got enough of that for Bryce. And so you see some hesitancy for him to hit that throw. And then because of the offensive line, you only got one chance on a given play.
Yep.
If you don't hit that play exactly the inches open, then you're either going to get sacked or you're going to throw a bad play. And so I think you're seeing a lot of that. I think that what's going to be very interesting going forward is the style of coach they try to find for Bryce, because you've seen them go with this type of coach who has been established, who's had the proven experience, but it hasn't worked for Bryce. To me, coaches, you typically go the other way with the coach hiring, which means you go for a younger, maybe a new age coach, maybe a first-time coach who can bring some of those principles you're talking about with the Bobby Slowick. What we're seeing for C.J. Stroud is they're using what he does best, his ability to extend plays, as a core element of their offense. That is not Bryce's skill set, but you have to figure out what is Bryce's best skill set, which is his anticipation, and make that a core part of the offense. And I really want to see that going forward with whoever they hire.
And I would say, too, that, with that point about anticipatory throwing and Bryce's strengths, it's been interesting to me that there's been obviously a severe lack of big plays on the field for Carolina's offense this year.
Yeah.
But who have they come to when they've been made? Guys whose names you didn't know when the season started often. Michael Strawn, we knew who Stephon Sullivan was, but no one expected him to be a big playmaker. It's just been interesting to watch the rare few big plays unfold and how they do it, and to go back and look and say, okay, why did that work? Can they replicate that in other ways? And I think they can. And I field a lot of questions about Bryce every day on my show, and the skeptics, the doubters, even the haters will say things. What does he do well? What is he elite at? And I think, well, if you've got to name a superpower of Bryce Young's, I think it's accuracy and ball placement. When the guy has time to throw, he will put the ball where it's supposed to be. And I think we've seen a lot of examples of that. So I still think there's something to work with there. I think he can absolutely win games. But his struggles and just the overall messy situation here have been amplified and made to look far worse by the fact that C.J. Stroud is balling out. Yeah. If it weren't for that, I don't think it would be as loud, because in many ways, Bryce Young is having a very typical rookie season in the NFL.
Up and down. He's had some games where you go, okay, I can see some things. You have some other games you go, man, I hope that does not continue. But that's part of being a rookie.
Yep.
Yes.
Right.
And not only that, I mean, you look, and I was chuckling the other day because I had the Patriots game on off to the side, and I was watching Twitter while I was doing some other things. Mac Jones gets benched again. You have a lot of the national NFL guys saying it's over for Mac Jones in New England. That's his fourth benching. Certainly they're moving on. And that's all fine and well. But I got to thinking, I was like, and then I started looking, and I saw how many articles were written at the end of 2021 about Mac Jones, about is it the greatest NFL rookie year of all time? And how many titles is Mac Jones going to win in New England? And less than 2 years later, we're declaring the Mac Jones era over. And so, I brought it up last week. I said, I wish I could hop into a time machine and see what people are saying about C.J. Stroud a year from now or 2 years from now. Yep. Not at all because I wish ill will on the young man, but because things change quickly in the NFL. So,
they do. Go ahead, Cal.
Kyle, I want to go back to a point you made, because I think it can't be stated enough how much C.J. Stroud's success. Like, I just was in Houston doing the C.J. Stroud Trevor Lawrence Bowl, and I came away with this talking to dudes in the locker room about how we've got 2 top 10 quarterbacks who are going to be, the next great rivalry in the NFL. And I can't help but think how much that has a factor in this, because just keep it 100. You got David Tepper, who brings in a quarterback hoping that it lifts his franchise. He talked about Super Bowls when they drafted Bryce Young, and he's looking at his stadium when they play the Cowboys, overridden by Cowboys fans. And on the other side of it, the Texans are still selling out their stadium for a monster divisional battle, right? And so you have to compare and contrast and say, why isn't my guy doing that for me? And then to top things off, you got Will Levis, the Titans quarterback, who didn't play necessarily great, but beats the Panthers. A guy in the second round beats your first overall pick. That just feels embarrassing. And so I can't help but think that might have been the final straw for David Tepper.
Talking about Dave Tepper, what are you guys' opinion? I've gotten accused of being a homer, and Steve's on his payroll, so I'm not on the payroll, but I do have a relationship. I do have a relationship with not a lot of people, but it's just like, I'm not going to sit here and say a guy who's made $20 billion is an idiot. I don't think he's an idiot.
No, I don't think there's reason to think the guy's an idiot. You and I talked about this. I had this conversation, with you and then about you after you got off the air last week. It was like, it's funny that it was just a few years ago that people were like, well, how are we going to get Steve back in the fold? How are we going to get Steve back in the family? We got to get Steve back in Bank of America. He needs to be a greater part of this organization. And now, because you have an opinion, some people are like, oh, he's just carrying water for David Tepper. And it's like, no, and I'm with you, and I've said this before, David Tepper wants to win football games. If you don't think that he wants to win football games, you're an idiot.
So you saying that him buying the Panthers was not just, it wasn't for the tax write-off?
I hate to break it to some people, but no, it wasn't just for the tax write-off. No. I mean, yes, he's gotten far richer since he owned the team, but he'd be way richer even more if he won a Super Bowl, right? Yeah. So, of course, the man wants to win football games. And I think Cameron can speak to this because he's been around the league a long time, and you and I just talked about it a few minutes back. Like, it took Bob Kraft several years to get this right. It took the Pagulas several years to get this right. You can go on down ownership in the NFL. I mean, the Yorks out in San Francisco, Jed York didn't really start to figure it out until post-Harbaugh in a sense, right? Just in terms of how to conduct and run an organization, to hire people, to get along, and who's responsible for what. So I get it. David, I'm going to go see David Tepper here in about 40 minutes in a press conference up the street, right? Yet again, I'm going to go watch Dave say, all right, we're going to figure it out this time. But it's not abnormal throughout the history of the NFL for owners who buy teams to struggle in the beginning. And I saw Ryan Clark yesterday, and I'm not calling out Ryan or RC. I'm just saying that, he's taken a lot of heat. Some people are calling him a super fan who owns a football team. And, that's not a good thing. And while I understand that philosophically, who among us, if we were worth $20 billion and could outright own an NFL team as football fans, wouldn't want to be involved? Who wouldn't want to be in the room, asking questions?
So you're saying being absentee owner?
In a way, he probably is going to have to be, because if we're being honest, that's what the Rooneys do well. That's what some of the great ownership groups do well. But nobody should fault David Tepper for wanting to be involved. It's all right to look at him and say, hey, maybe let the football guys make the final football decisions. But who among you as diehard football fans, if you could buy a team, wouldn't want to be inside those rooms?
Yeah.
So I think the guy wants to win.
Every big investment that I make, I want to be involved in. So I understand it from that standpoint. Kyle, to your point about Jed York, like, people don't realize this. Jed York had fired 3 coaches in 24 months before they hired Kyle Shanahan. And nobody remembers it because it worked out for Kyle Shanahan. So all of this gets erased when you get the right guy. Like, yes, David Tepper, the reality is this is his 6th head coach, including interim, since 2018. That is an alarming number. There has to be some sense of a stability for you to have a comfortable setting that people want to come into. At the same time, if he gets that right coach, nobody's going to care about the last 6. And so that's why this is such an important hire. I think you're on the money. There probably is a need for him to step back a little bit and let his football honchos do what he does. But I don't have a huge problem with him making this move here, because if he clearly sees Frank is not the right guy, I always think it's better to make the move too soon than too late. And that's what he's doing there. So such a huge hire for him going forward. I think there was the old saying Jed York said 5 years ago, you can't fire owners. So as much as you might want to be mad at David Tepper, he's not going anywhere. It's his money. It's his team. And so you just hope that he learns from maybe this hire, and the next one is a different philosophy.
So where does Frank Reich go from here, right? Looking at, so we'll start at Frank. Where does Frank Reich go? And then where do the Carolina Panthers go?
I think Frank Reich goes off into retirement,
yes.
Personally.
Yes.
I think Frank Reich's a father, a grandfather who wants to see, he's a family man. He's a man of devout, strong faith. And I think Frank Reich goes off into retirement and spends time with his kids. And I think he'd be completely justified in doing that. I really do. It's not that I don't think he should or could coach again. I just think, based on my own conversations with him, what I know about him, I think Frank Reich rides off into the sunset and becomes the full-time family man that he always was. That's what I would expect.
Kyle, I think you're absolutely right. In fact, I was talking to guys in that building the last few weeks before it happened, and he actually told some of his assistants that if he gets out, this is going to be his last ride. And so he's already said that, speaking into existence. I know he talked to Scott Fowler for a Charlotte Observer story and told Scott, this is probably my last ride. He's 62 years old, and let's keep it a buck. He's still getting paid by the Colts. He's got $30 million left on that contract. He's probably got $40 million left on this Panthers contract. That's a nice retirement gift. You got $50+ million, and you could just go on the beach, go on the boats, travel the country, the world with your wife. I'd imagine we've probably seen the last of Frank Reich as a coach, and I probably would do the same if I was him.
After taxes, out $25.7 million.
It's not too. I think a man could live off that if he needed to.
Maybe.
Yeah, I think so.
Even to screw it up, it'll take about 6 years.
Yeah. You go buy your lake house, get a few boats, jet skis.
Even to trick it off, it'll take a minute to trick it off.
And so Frank's going to be good. The reality is he's going to be riding off in the sunset. What I want to focus on is maybe the other assistants, right? Because let's start with a guy we just mentioned earlier, Giro. This is the second straight year Giro Averos has essentially got his head coach has got fired in season in year one. Nathaniel Hackett last year in Denver, this year in Carolina. He's got to uproot his family again for a third year, and he's done a really good job with his defense. They're 6th in total yards for a team that's 1-10, and he's going to have to uproot his family. Thomas Brown, who's been the offensive coordinator, he's been in here, and he's probably not going to get another offensive coordinator shot this year. He's probably going to have to go backwards in his career after this. Josh McCown fired in his first year. What does he do from here? Like, these are a lot of the parts we don't talk about because it's not the head guy, but a lot of guys are probably going to have to take a step backwards or reevaluate or uproot their family.
because of this. So Frank's going to be good. The rest of the guys are probably going to have a little bit more of trouble kind of resetting their lives.
So what's the expectation then for the Carolina Panthers now under new interim head coach, no longer Frank Reich, but you still have some of the assistants still in their positions, respectable positions. So what do you do to finish out the season, and then what do you do heading into free agency?
I mean, Chris Tabor's done this before, right? He's taken over, I think, in Chicago, and if not, I think in Missouri as well. That's a guy that you can trust to get you to the end of the season. Jim Caldwell, Lord knows that man knows some things about offensive football, and he's been around, and so that's why I didn't find the terminations of Josh McCown and even Deuce Staley shocking, because Jim Caldwell can handle that for 6 weeks, and I think you're looking for some semblance of continued development. I think you hope over these next 6 games that Jim Caldwell's wisdom, his experience on the offensive side, his ability to coach on field and relate to guys can help Bryce Young be the best quarterback that he can be for the next 6 games to give you an idea of what you should do when the season's over. And that's assuming that, ownership in the front office doesn't already have an idea of what they want to do.
So Ken, what would you say about if things are going to change, that would indicate there were some things that weren't changing. And you and I both know, and I mentioned it on your show, is Bryce Young in college he majored in the RPO game.
Yes.
Why didn't the Carolina Panthers or Frank Reich as a play caller have the RPO game in this offense?
So some of it, they probably the personnel that they believe they had, but the reality is it's not something that Frank likes to do. Just keep it a buck. I understand even when Thomas Brown was the play caller, there were certain elements that he was allowed to call versus not allowed to call within the offense. And so you look at a situation where Frank's the head honcho, and Frank believes in a certain philosophy that's worked with him for some extent for a long portion of his career. But I do think that you got to rely on a lot of the college principles that Bryce Young has had. I know they've gone back in the tape and looked at some of those plays that he ran in Alabama to have some success. I'd imagine you see a lot more of those last 6 or 7 weeks. I think you'll see more motion. That is something that was in that Rams offense that Thomas Brown's in. Now that there's no head honcho, so to speak, that says this is the type of offense we got to run, I think you're going to see the type of principles that we hope to see, and really to see how Bryce grasps on these. How does he set himself up for 2024? It probably won't be with anybody on this staff, but if they can show, hey, Bryce is really good when we run this RPO type concept here, then it sets him up for at least some positives going into the offseason, some things that he can hold his hat on. And so I think that's what David Tepper wants to see. I think that's what you'll see Thomas Brown and Jim Caldwell try. And I think you just want to see progress, some hope, some optimism going into 2024 for Bryce.
One of the things that always shocked me when I was watching, even in the last week in the Tennessee game, you have an offensive line who's giving up pressure, right? Who you're not doing a lot of play action. You're in a shotgun formation, which indicates now the defense can, data-wise, they can remove several plays out of your playbook that we know you're not running. Out of the pistol formation. Then if we overload, meaning have more guys on our right side of the offense than we're supposed to, and you got the running back who's in and next to the quarterback who's in pistol shotgun formation, he's off to the left. And all of a sudden they say a word and the running back now shifts to the other side. Now you have keyed the defense. What we think you're doing by this overload, now you've shifted. We're 100% right. Now us being 100% right, we may have 30 plays that we think you can run. Now by shifting, we've reduced it down to maybe 15. And let me exaggerate. Maybe it's only 5. You've shifted. You've now allowed the defense to say, hey, we know in this formation with this look and this personnel, they're running these 10 plays. And they're in shotgun formation. So now we already know they're not running a power play with a fullback. So we can remove 1 or 2. So now we think we got to narrow it down.
Mark Schlereth did a really good job pointing that out on the game broadcast on Sunday, and I thought he did a very nice job of doing it professionally and politely. But he did it in the beginning of the third quarter, where he came out and he said, "Listen, there are 3 elements to pass protection, and the Panthers aren't really doing any of them well." But he said, "This is on Frank Reich." He said, "Frankly, Frank has to be better, because the play calling has such a big impact on protection."
Yes.
And, Mark was pointing that out early in the second half. He said, "Listen, Frank's just got to be better here, because he's not really giving his quarterback an opportunity to be protected based on the way that he's calling plays."
And you got a guard who's the backup to the backup that went down. Mm-hmm. So you got Savala goes down.
Yep.
Caden May goes down. And then you have someone else in there, and you're dropping back as if the starting guard, who's inconsistent, the backup starting guard, who's inconsistent, and now the third guard, we don't know how he is, because technically.
Right. Yeah. You're on your third guard. What do you expect?
And we weren't expecting him to play. And you're dropping back, going against Tark and
Jeffrey Simmons,
as if you got time, you got all day.
No. Doesn't work.
Man, go ahead.
This is going to be a very interesting offseason for the Panthers as far as personnel. I'm curious to see what they prioritize, because you can't fill it all in one offseason. We talk about all the needs on this team. The offensive line is a huge need. I'm curious whether the new coach feels like Bryce needs offensive line help more, or does he need to influence of speed in the receiving group? Because I think it's an interesting dilemma. Of course, as a fan, you're like, we need both. We need 3 new offensive linemen.
That's what I was.
We need 2 or 3 different receivers.
When you start, I was like,
"Here's my Christmas list."
Yeah, right. I need all this. The reality is, you only have so much money. You only have so much picks. You're gonna have to figure out, what do I prioritize, right? Like, as I go into free agency in a draft period, what does Bryce need most? And I think that's going to be an evaluation for the next head coach. I bring up Miami because Mike McDaniel came in, and all the talk in the offseason for the Dolphins was they need offensive line help to protect Tua, because he had been hurt so much. And Mike said, no, he needs speed. And he went and got Tyreek Hill to go with Jalen Waddle. And, of course, you're not just going to go get Tyreek Hill. But the speed has been what opened things up for Tua. And the offensive line is still a question in Miami. I wonder if speed, more than anything, is what Bryce Young needs. And I'm not saying it is, but if that's the answer, then do you put more of your resources in, let's go get bona fide 1 or 2 elite receivers for Bryce to open up the offense, to spread things up, and try to simplify it for him to make he get his first read, quick throwing, and we try to make things work with limited resources on the offensive line? Or do you go the other way? I think that's going to be a very interesting question that I don't know if I have the full answer to yet.
So you're saying that, and I was sitting there waiting. I'm like, because the first thing that comes to my mind, that's great. You can bring in all the speed you want, or you can solidify the offensive line.
Well,
but if the creator of the offense does not have what these offense coordinators have today, is answers to the test. Your offensive line cannot hold up past 3.39 tenths of a second time in the pocket. Then you need to get some guys that can help you get to 2.78 to 2.8.
Or 2.3, 2.4. Some of the top quarterbacks are time to throw at 2.3.
And get guys. I don't think the same way you can't evaluate Bryce, I don't think it's been fair to evaluate DJ Chark and company and say they can't play, because DJ Chark is a vertical guy. But you know how they use him? Horizontal.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're absolutely right. The only argument I would make, and I think it's a strong one for offensive line, my buddy Tyler Dunn wrote a great piece. He's been tracking the rookie quarterbacks all year, and I think it's Josh Lucas, former personnel man with the Saints, made a point. He said, when we had Drew, and everybody knows Drew Brees was not a great big guy, he said, we made it a point to always invest more than just about any other franchise in our interior offensive line. And they did. They had studs in the middle of the offensive line, so there was always a pocket to step up into for a guy who wasn't 6'4" tall.
You want to stunt the growth of your quarterback? get, which I believe this is part of why Bryce isn't playing well, is if you invest in tackles over guards and centers,
Yep.
you will slow the process of your quarterback down because the guard and center are more important than tackles. Because the guard and center, if they can keep position, that gives the quarterback enough time. One, he develops comfortability in the pocket. He has the ability to step back, right? He can bounce, get back there. You see the Carolina Panthers, when they play Dak Prescott is not 6'5".
Right.
But Dak Prescott was in them Jordans. He was just sitting back there.
Yep.
Right. A few times I had to pause. I was like, whoa, them things just fresh
Bouncing.
right there. But he got enough pocket presence and pocket depth to deliver the football because they, right there, in the center and guard is the most important part of developing your quarterback. If the quarterback does not feel comfortable, then when he has time, he doesn't know it. And when he doesn't have time, he still doesn't know it.
Well, and there's been a couple of times where as much, flack as Ike Ekwonu's taken for some of his performances this year, there have been times where you can watch Ike. Yeah, he might get beat off the edge, but he recovers just well enough to run his guy upfield. Right.
And Bryce can't step up.
And Bryce can't step up.
You know why? Because somebody's coming up the middle.
Right.
To that point on Ike, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. I know he's a number 6 overall pick, but I've had multiple offensive line coaches tell me, move him into left guard, and you get a different level of player. And you talk about the interior offensive line. If you really want to prioritize it, and I know it's probably admitting a somewhat of a mistake, but if you move him inside, maybe that solidifies your ability to play at least one guard spot if he is better inside and you just get a different answer outside.
Well, here's my assessment on Ike. I think Ike can play.
Yeah.
Right? I think moving him to guard is a possibility. And I play with a guy, Travell Wharton, right? South Carolina. We called him the Dancing Bear. Mm-hmm. I think the difference between Travell Wharton and Ike right now, when you compare the two in that transition, because Travell struggled at tackle when he first got here. They moved him to guard. Dan Henney did, and that's where but the reason why that Travell's outcome at guard played so good, Travell had excellent feet for a big man.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think right now today that Ike right now, if they moved him tomorrow, you still would have a little bit of issues because when I look at Ike, watching him play, he's a heavyweight puncher.
Mm-hmm.
My man has no curveball. He has no sinker. He's a mauler.
It's Mike Tyson.
Right? He's a mauler, and that's why he's so successful in college.
Yeah.
Why he rolls up is he's a run blocker.
Mm-hmm.
Gets his hands on you. He'll move you. But the difference is to be a heavy puncher, you have to do something that people don't see. You got to have your feet planted in the ground a little bit deeper than some of the other people who are jabbers.
Yeah.
Right? When you just say, you're going.
Yeah.
But when you out there, you're moving ground. And that's what Ike is. He's heavy foot.
Yeah.
So to move him to guard, I think he has to be a little bit lighter on his feet.
Yep.
I talked to Dave Dorn about this at NC State a couple of weeks ago. Your buddy, Dave Dorn.
Yeah. Tell him I said hello. Yeah. Actually, I'll text him after
you should
finish.
do that, yeah. But one of the I asked him about this, right? Because he and Ike are close, and I talked to Dave when they drafted Ike. And I could tell that Dave, in his answer had been watching a little bit. But I said, what would you tell Ike, right now with he's struggling a little bit? And he emphasized, he said a couple of times, he said, trust your training, trust your training, trust your training. And it was that you can watch the film and you see a different type of footwork, several times, sometimes on the same drive.
Yeah.
And, coaches will tell you that's a guy who's not trusting his training.
And he's not trusting his training is because the outcome.
Yeah.
The results.
Yeah.
He's trying to – that's what – my man, the whole offensive line, they're in the middle of the ocean with the wind blowing, and they got floaties on, bro. Little kid floaties. And it's just they're just treading water. They're just trying to get through the rough patch.
Yeah, and I don't envy those guys. Some of those fire breathers they're facing off the edge, I don't envy them. That's a tough job.
No. What you got, Cam?
As far as Ike, I think that your point about his feet is a great point. That's something in the offseason you have to work out. And I think you get a really good offensive line coach with him. Let him make that determination. I think that's why the next staff is going to be so key if you have the right teachers. Like, you can be good coaches, good schemers, but are you good teachers, right? And so you have a very young roster in regards to your key players, your offensive lineman we're talking about, your young quarterback. Scheme is such a big part of it, but teaching for these guys is such a bigger element. And so your point about him having different footwork in game that's a coaching element. Your coaches have to teach down to you time and time again that this is the way and this is the right way and this is how you should feel it. And
but hold on, no. My only thing though, I would say, as a player, former player.
Yep.
Man, we all have coaching, we all have assignments and detail and responsibility. But when you get in that arena and you find yourself on that island and ain't nobody coming to save you, bro, you gonna try everything.
You revert to what you're comfortable with, right?
Hey, coach, that's great.
Yeah.
You
don't have to face Myles
Garrett. Not out here trying to block Jeffrey Simmons.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Coach, all you gotta do is just put your hand out there. Just stab him.
You try.
The last time I did that, he almost broke my phone.
Oh, dude, I watched Jeffrey Simmons ragdoll Kate Mays on Sunday, and I thought that guy's got the worst job in America. That man has the worst job in America today. You could not pay me to do that job today.
Zavala go down, Kate Mays go, okay. They said, go, Jeff. He goes, well, so we just gonna ISO me, huh?
Yeah, huh?
We gonna ISO the new guy.
No help. The center can't come up.
Hey, Bryce, I need a mic to the left.
Help me, please.
Somebody help Chip or something.
Hey, help me help you.
Oh, I felt bad for that guy. I really felt bad for him.
When he got hurt, he said, "Oh, it's hurt.
Yeah.
This thing is broken. I can't feel my toes. Nothing.
Is it still there?" Oh Lord!
So that boy said he got hurt. I said, "There he hurt." He went, "Oh,
yeah."
He said, "Oh, my ankle."
I just saw it. I was like, "Yeah, that tracks." I saw what Jeffrey Simmons just did to you. It tracks. It looked like it hurt.
Yeah, that bus ran you scot over. Oh my gosh, man. I feel so bad laughing, but it's true.
It is
because
true.
I've been out there.
Yeah.
Where you going? How is it going to work today?
What am I going to do with this guy?
Look, how is today, how and when will today unfold? Fourth quarter?
Yeah.
Second quarter?
Yeah.
Or the third quarter?
You just do your best.
Yeah.
That's all you can do.
Right?
Yep.
Like you got the Deshaun Watson against the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah.
45 seconds in, you go. At some point, in those first 45, pick six.
Yeah.
You go, nah, that wasn't on the script.
Don't think that's the play they called.
Hey, on our openers, it had a tipped interception, not on the menu, right? First thing that pops in my head now is, who's the right coach to come in, right? And then, which I know happens, which is part of the other struggle, a new coach comes in, you know what they want. Their guy.
Their own everything. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know who it's going to be. And, again, David Tepper's going to talk in about 15 minutes, and he's going to tell us, I think, to some extent what he plans to do. I don't know if he's going to reveal much, but I suspect he's going to call Ben Johnson back and see how much it's going to take to get him out of Detroit.
See, here's the thing about the Ben Johnson. Everybody keeps talking about Ben Johnson went ahead and told, he told the Lions, "Oh, man, I'm staying. I'm here for." Mm-hmm. I heard the interview didn't go well. And that it was like, I think I'm going to go ahead and stay here because I heard that I've heard first-time candidate coaches sometimes don't interview well. And so they go on a few interviews and then all of a sudden, hey, you didn't really present a good case for yourself. So won't you go ahead and decline the second interview, stay, because nobody's going to really come out. Like, nobody ever really comes out. I've never heard this in camps, and I've never heard this in coach. Nobody ever comes out and says, hey, we drafted this kid in the second round. Yeah, that was a mistake.
Right.
Can't block, can't catch, can't throw. Yeah, well, we just hope he doesn't get hurt so we can release him. Nobody ever says that. I say, hey, we're working hard. Like, I was watching an interview after the game of Justin Fields talking about Lisa Saunders asked him, how did he overcome those 2 fumbles? And he was like, oh, man, my coaches backed me. And I was hearing him, and he never really answered the question. He never answered the question. Hey, how'd you battle back? Well, I want to hear, man, I just need to stop doing what I was doing to screw up. That's what I need to do.
Sometimes it is that simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, so I'm interested to know the new coach. Is it a culture guy? Or is it another offensive guy? Or is it a defensive guy?
That's what I can't wait to find out.
Yeah.
That's what I can't wait to find out.
I almost feel like it has to be an offensive guy. I hate the narrowing to one offense or defense. But given this issue was about Bryce, it's got to be about Bryce with this next hire. And I think that's where it centers in on finding your offensive coach. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a first-time head coach, one of those young guys who maybe have the scheme, maybe have the ability to get the most out of Bryce. I wouldn't be surprised if they gave a call to Bobby Slowick out in Houston. It's a different style of offense, but he's a guy who evaluated Bryce and CJ a bunch. Do you give him a shot? I mentioned Miami a few times. Do you try to take them, one of their coaches, and try to emulate that? A Frank Smith down there or a Darryl Bevel down there as well. Try to see if you can get some of those elements duplicated. Do you go up to Philly and ask Brian Johnson, who's been with Jalen Hurts, and see if he can come down and do that for Bryce? I
would say,
yeah,
I'm a Brian Johnson fan because he went to Utah, right? He's quarterback. He led the use against Alabama in the Sugar Bowl back yonder.
That's your guy,
right? I'm not sure, based off what I've seen with Brian Johnson as a first-year offensive coordinator, if he really has found his way yet.
Yeah.
I think he's still
a year too early. Yeah.
I think he's still figuring it out. And if he's figuring out how to be an offensive coordinator, I don't think he's mastered figuring out how to be a head coach and a play caller all at the same time.
We had conversations about Brian last year when we thought there was a chance they were keeping Steve Wilks. There are a lot of folks who thought that if Wilks got the job, that Brian Johnson would be the offensive coordinator here. So he's an interesting name. But I'm with you. I think you're watching a guy, still young, figure it out. He might not be ready yet for that position. But he's an interesting name to watch.
Absolutely. And I think you're probably right about Brian Johnson. I will one caveat I will say. A lot of times you got to take a chance on the coach a year early, especially in your situation. The Panthers, to get him. The LA took a shot on Sean McVay before he was probably ready, right? Same for Miami and Mike McDaniel. That was the only interview he had as head coach that year, right? And so, not saying these are duplicates, but sometimes for these younger scheme guys, if you're not in a situation where you're the hottest job on the market, which Carolina's not going to be a hot job on the market, you might have to take a little bit of a risk. Not saying it's Brian, maybe it's somebody else, but a risk on a guy who on the surface is maybe a year or two away as a coach, and hope that his genius can catch up with your young guy as well.
All right, a few more. What did you bring in? Obviously, they're going to bring in a new head coach. Do you keep Scott Fitter?
I don't know how you do. I mean, like you and I talked about last time, I understand you can succeed in the NFL doing things unconventionally, and there are folks who would tell you that you shouldn't follow convention, but there's a long history in the NFL of hiring a general manager, letting that general manager pick the coach, have control. And we've seen this organization go from firing the head coach to keeping the general manager to hiring a new head coach to firing that general manager. So, I mean, it's gone Ron Rivera, Marty Herney, Matt Rule, Scott Fitterer. I mean, at some point, I think a lot of folks believe that you should bring in two at the same time. But, reasonable minds can disagree. You just got to find the right guy to make these draft picks and make these trades. And I think there are a lot of folks here in Charlotte, myself included, who like Scott. And I liked his aggressiveness early on. But I think when you size up the resume right now, I think you have to be honest and say there are probably more misses than hits. And so that's a very real conversation to have.
It's a hard job, like you said.
Yep.
I think the job is more hits than misses. And a big part of it is the coach has to have a gelling with the GM. And so I think that'll be a huge part of it. But I'm not so ready to fire Scott. Like, I know that's the overwhelming prevailing thought because of how this went, because of how the personnel's looking. But the move to go get Bryce was made with confidence, with assertion. And ultimately, I think that he will be proven right with that move. I think that you got to get the right coach, the right development. Right now, it's looking very murky. But essentially, for me, given that Matt Rule was the end-all, be-all for all their decision-making through their tenure there, this was the first year that Scott had full control of personnel. And so I know you made the essential one-and-done move for Frank, but I don't know that you've got to make that rash decision with Scott and what feels like to me his first full year as decision maker. I would give him another year or two if he gels with the new head coach, but it's going to be interesting.
Well, I look at it like this. When you look at the general manager, he is to manage, but you also have to talk to your head coach and ask, what type of players are you looking for, right? And the example is DJ Chark comes in. He's a vertical guy. But yet the way you're utilizing him isn't really putting him in the best position. So now it's deemed that Scott made a bad move.
Right.
And DJ Chark can't play. But this is the same DJ Chark we saw make plays in Jacksonville.
Yep.
Got hurt.
And in the stadium on Christmas Eve last year.
Correct. And then made some plays in Detroit. So what I'm saying is, for the general manager to be able to evaluate them properly, you got to also look at what was the instructions given to him by the head coach on the offense. When you say, we're looking for a Z and an X and a Y, right? Y is tight end, X is the outside receiver, Z is the receiver set on the tight end side. In this type of offense, Z, the offense goes through with Thomas Brown, a la the Los Angeles Rams, Sean McVay, Cooper Kupp. But yet in this offense, it goes through the Y, which is Adam Thielen. However, these other guys still have to clear out. So if you're not given clear detail to the general manager, you say, hey, we need a speed guy. Okay, I got you a speed guy. But if you're playing a speed guy in the wrong position, utilizing him wrong, is that the general manager's fault, or is that the coach, or is it a combination?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's a great question. It's going to be an interesting offseason. I think David Tepper's talking here in a few minutes, so hopefully he'll give us some answers. But we're going to have this talk plenty, Steve, I'm sure.
Yeah, we are.
In the weeks ahead, the months ahead. It's a very interesting time for the Panthers once again. And, we're going to see what David Tepper does.
Well, I appreciate it, man. That's the Panthers breakdown, the quarterly report. I am Steve Smith Sr. This is Kyle Bailey and Cam Wolfe.
Yes, sir.
This is Cut to It. Thanks for watching.